Welcome to the Community Voice. I'm Fara Sax. Joining me today is filmmaker Paul Bachow. His film, Against All Odds, Surviving the Holocaust, premieres this weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday at the 25th Miami Jewish Film Festival. And I am so honored to have you here, Paul. It's like your work is amazing. I've seen both films, and I welcome you and thank you so much for taking the time to be with me here.
It's an honor. It's an honor to be here with you. And I've already spoken to you a little bit, and I know how passionate you are about this subject.
Not only the subject, but just the quality of your work. In my former life, I was a film critic. So it was like, when I saw it, I said, this is a cinematic genius of film. And let's get into it. So how did you become a filmmaker? I sound like a Jewish mother. Why did you want to become a filmmaker?
Well, it's a very, very easy answer. My father walked around forever with a camera in his hand. He shot video of everything. And I picked up that habit. So I've been filming things forever. For example, in the first film, A Journey into the Holocaust, there's footage there of my grandmother describing how she survived a pogrom, or she was hiding in the basement, but what happened during the whole pogrom. I filmed her 35 years ago. So just by always having a camera, that's one of the very few interviews of someone who survived a pogrom.
Wow. And your grandmother in Eastern Europe lost some of her family.
Yes.
Did that make you want to become a filmmaker, specializing in and really focusing in on the Holocaust as a subject?
Well, the focus on the Holocaust comes from my grandmother telling me the story of how there was a pogrom in her town of Zhytomyr, which was 60,000 people, 50% Jewish. But there was a pogrom which happened regularly. She was hiding in the basement of the next door neighbor, and they could see out the window as the masses came and took her father and brother out of their house, and they were killed. Her mother said, I have to do something to get my daughter out of this country, because it was in the Pale of Settlement. And she found a couple that had 3 daughters, and they had gotten papers to come to America. And it was very difficult to get papers to come to America.
What year was this?
This was about 1904. And what happened is she went to that couple because she had heard they were concerned. They had a daughter that had birth defects of the eye, as my grandmother always told me. So because they had birth defects, and at that time when you came into Ellis Island, they checked you for physical disabilities, they were afraid the entire family would be sent back. So my grandmother's mother worked out a deal where they swapped kids. She gave my grandmother to them. They brought her to America, and she took their daughter with birth defects, and my grandmother never saw her mother again. If that hadn't happened, she was 11 years old then. If that hadn't happened, my grandmother and my mother would have been killed in the Holocaust. So I've always been questioning, why did this happen? Why did it happen? And that's really what that first film answers. The Journey into the Holocaust answers why it happened.
And just as a background, you interview survivors. It's a documentary sprinkled with film and history to tell their story.
Yes, there are 14 survivors in that film, but we don't get to the Holocaust until well into the film. It's where does all the hatred come from? What are the elements that cause genocide? The role of family upbringing, the role of religion, the role of the media, the role of government, the role of education. These things embed beliefs into someone at a very young age. You can't get rid of those beliefs, which is why in Iran, you see 6-year-olds marching with bomb vests, because they already believe this is the right thing to do.
And in that film, you really talk about genocide not only as a subject for the Holocaust, but what's going on in our world after, before, and even presently.
Yes. And, one of the messages at the end of the film is this idea of never again is false. Okay. Genocides will continue to happen. And if you go to the website that we have, which is www.ajourneyintotheholocaust.com, there is a chart, which is 4 pages long, of the 90 genocides that have happened after the Holocaust, and 55 million people killed in these genocides. And we hear them all the time. So it's the beliefs that get implanted in somebody that allow them to murder people face to face.
And you were talking about you and I have had conversations off camera, and we talked about never again and what you learned, that lesson. So maybe you want to share that.
Sure. What these kinds of films and this kind of education should make people aware of is, one, to take threats very seriously. Two, never look at a threat from your own vantage point. Look at it from the other person's vantage point, because they see things differently than you. You seeing it your own way is not going to protect you. You have to understand that they may be very, very serious about trying to kill you and wipe out your whole race. So you have to look at it that way. And the idea is, when you start to look at it that way, you then react. You take steps. Maybe you have to leave. You have to go to some place that's safer. You're seeing this with a lot of the Latin American countries now, where Jews have to leave to protect themselves. And this has been going on for 2,000 years, where Jews have to leave to protect themselves. But let's not be naive and assume that we are protected and we're safe.
Yeah, I experienced a lot of that growing up, and I just was like, you Jew killer, you killed Christ. What? I didn't understand that. And my daughter in high school was pushed into lockers, being called dirty Jew. And it was like very jarring. And I didn't, I went to the school and the principal, but it wasn't taken far enough and with such gravity as it needed to be, because those are huge, huge offenses.
And attacks on Jews are up massively, including murders like in Pittsburgh, but ongoing attacks. You see them on television now, where people just go up and attack people in the street. So things are not so great.
And in your first film, that was taken up, and it's used as an educational tool.
Yes, that
47 states.
Teachers in 47 states use the film. We created an incredible teacher's guide. It's about 34 pages long. 4 PhDs worked on it. It breaks down the program into 5 sessions so that no class session is more than 20 minutes, because that's really what the educators say. After that, kids start to zone out or fall asleep. So it has everything. It has words like pogrom in it. It has vocabulary words. It has questions.
And most people don't even know what that is.
They don't.
What does that mean?
A lot of the words they don't know that are in there. So they're learning about it, and they create these, we give them 11 to 13 questions per section of the film, and no classroom can handle more than 2, just because everybody wants to talk about whatever that subject is.
And how old are the children that are receiving this?
Advanced kids from 6th grade and everyone else from 7th grade up.
Is it too late even at that age to receive this information,
well,
so that the hatred doesn't, perpetuate by then?
It's a question of some of the stuff we're covering in the film. You're showing gas chambers and ovens and stuff like that. So this new film can be used by younger students, but that the educators have told me everybody 7th and up, middle school and up, and for advanced kids, 6th grade.
And it was called the gold standard.
Yeah, it's been called the gold standard of Holocaust education. And teachers have written to me and said they have had big trunks with all sorts of material, and they would pull out a little of this and a little of that, to show the class and teach it. And they said, everything that I need is right in your film. I don't have to do this anymore.
What
it's
a gift.
complete.
What a gift. Kudos to you and your team really making this happen and bringing it to the forefront. So we're here to talk about even your new film, Surviving the Holocaust, Against All Odds, or Against All Odds, Surviving the Holocaust. So probably best way to do it is to show the clip of it.
Okay, let's roll it.
Roll it.
I was lucky because I lived almost 1 year in underground.
With blonde hair and blue eyes, I was the front. Listen, we make a camp for children. So that I said, you're not making your future.
My neighbor was standing on the corner and told us, don't go home, the Gestapo is waiting for you.
Do we save my father or do we save the children?
Mm-hmm. It was raw. It was riveting. Tell me how it began, how this process began to create a second film with the same subject matter and just different survivors.
Well, I have been filming survivors for a long time for a variety of reasons. One of them is that the Shoah Foundation stopped filming survivors a long, long time ago, over 15 years ago. So I wanted to capture these stories, and that ended up being part of the first film. When we were showing the film to different locations, there was a synagogue in Del Rey that is basically used it's an over 55-year-old synagogue. They don't have young kids there. And they have a lot of survivors. So we had my wife's mother was a congregant, and she wanted them to see the film. So they said, okay, we're going to show the film. And I go there, and there are like 150 survivors there. And not all survivors, maybe 120 were survivors. And they're all telling me, listen, we don't watch these films because it's very upsetting. And I said, I understand that. If you can't watch the film, that's fine. But this film starts at the time of Jesus Christ, and we don't get to the Holocaust for a while. So they said, okay, I'll watch the first part of the film, and then we'll probably get up and leave. So they watched the first part, and then the Holocaust part starts. And only two got up and walked out, two men. And I went out with them, and they said, listen, I'm sorry, I can't watch this. I said, it's no problem. But after a while, they realized no one else was walking out. So they said, maybe we'll go back in and see the film.
You must have something right in this film for them to stay.
Yeah. So at the end of the film, we're having a discussion, and I have a microphone, and a guy in the back, he's waving, I want to talk, I want to talk. So I said, okay, I give him the mic, and he goes, I watched the film, and I was on the screen the whole time. That was me on the screen. Those were my words. And I said, okay. He says, everything that was said is what I would say. And I just visioned myself saying that. So I said, great. And afterwards, we started to talk after the event broke up. And he told me some of his background, that he had survived in Berlin. And that's rare to find somebody who was still around who had been in Berlin, because that occurred earlier. And he said his story, and I said, could I record it? And he said, absolutely. And he is the first survivor in the film. In this film, Gerald Beagle, the first survivor in the film. So that's how it started, from somebody in an audience saying, I want to tell my story.
And how did you find the other three? I'm sure it wasn't difficult because he probably had a lot of friends.
Well, the next person in the film, Rosandra, Gerald's girlfriend had a girlfriend who was Rosandra. And she said, if you're filming Gerald, you should got to film her because her story is just incredible. So I filmed her, and then I started to notice that what was different about these survivor stories is that they were talking about life outside of the concentration camps. Okay, as I say to people, 3.5 survivors of our 4 were never in a concentration camp. And that is because eventually Gerald does go to a concentration camp. But the story of life outside the camps is something that's very rare and isn't told that often.
Well, let's just show the picture of, do you have a picture there? Can you tell me about this picture?
Well, this is a picture showing you how large the Jewish families were and how close they were at that time. So this is in Rosandra's portion of the film.
Right. That's why I wanted to show it.
But it's important that everyone knows, and we say right in the beginning of the film, these are all historic videos and stills, but not necessarily of the people that are talking.
And you weave that, you tell their stories, and then you show the footage or the pictures, and it's just it's riveting because we could piece it together. We piece it together as we move forward.
Well, that was an attempt. One of the goals of this film was to make it cinematic. How do we do something different than a straight documentary with somebody sitting in a chair and talking, and how do we make it alive? So the video being closely tied and the images to whatever's being discussed is part of it, but we also have fabulous music. We also have great sound effects, graphics that are come alive. So the goal is to make it cinematic so it appeals to a broader audience. It also can be dealt with in a younger audience. And I think that we've accomplished it.
100%. The thing that stuck out to me is during the storytelling, when you flash back and you actually have the survivors there, and then you underscored it with image, with music, and with sounds, and it was almost difficult to listen because it was so much to the senses of what we were seeing, what I was hearing, what I was feeling, all at the same time. So it really impacted me. I have to share that with you. Tell me about the other 2 survivors.
Well, Walter is somebody that I knew his father and was talking about. I knew his son. And I was talking about what I was working on, what project, and he goes, well, you've got to interview my dad. And Walter's a very interesting story outside of the film. Here's a man who at 2nd grade was thrown out of school, and he survives the Holocaust, eventually comes to America, and he eventually becomes a college math professor with no education to start with. He started so many years behind. So
he survived for a reason, and he really made good on his life from there on as a survivor.
Yes. And then the 4th person is Anita, which is very interesting, very, very powerful story. And it's interesting, people say, well, does everybody remember exactly what happened? How do they remember these things? And I always try to read any books relating to what they're saying. So Anita's mother wrote a book, and it was in Spanish because they had eventually ended up in Latin America, in Peru. But I translated it, read it to make sure that everything she said was consistent with something that was written 20 years earlier, because I wanted to be as accurate as possible.
How long did it take you to make this film?
4 years.
4 years. And so do you have you research? How does that happen? What's the process for you?
Well, of the 4 years, 2 years was spent looking at historic video and images and doing the research. I saw so much in terms of footage that I'd never seen. I was able to find stuff that most people haven't seen. And I think the process was important to make it cinematic. But that took them a long time, so, just to talk a little bit about the film, there's a time where Gerald is very, very hungry. It's his birthday. There's no food to eat. And he finds a potato peel and he cooks it on a fire. And he says, that was the best meal I've ever had. He still remembers to this day. Well, I spent maybe a month trying to find footage of somebody in those days, 1930s, 40s footage of somebody peeling a potato and it falling on the ground. But I found it. So that's the kind of effort that's been put in to tie the images into the story.
A labor of love, a labor of love. So what was one of the things that you learned in this process as a filmmaker, as a humanitarian, that it changed your whole outlook on the way you look at life, or the way you look at the Holocaust, or the way you look at the survivors? Because there's a lot going on, and them living outside the concentration camps, and just that survival instinct, or goes into fight or flight. I don't know. You tell me.
Well, the first film, we said as a clear conclusion that the Jews did not try to hide. They didn't try to escape because their families were too large. If they went into the woods with 30 people, how would they survive? How would they not be noticed? How would they have enough food? And therefore, they stayed together. What I learned in this film is that that was not true. Many stayed together, maybe most, but many did try to escape. An enormous number tried to escape. And a lot of that story is covered in this film. So they just didn't go like sheep. And I think that's an important message.
In the time we have left, tell me something else that we haven't covered that you'd
Sure.
like to share.
We are rapidly coming to the time when there are no more survivors. And these survivors, many, many of them, not all, many can't discuss it, the Holocaust, but many have gone to classrooms, they've gone to public events, they've spoken, tell their stories to people. That has always been a very impressive experience for somebody, an incredible learning experience that they retain. Well, I wanted to create something that takes over their role of telling people their stories and preserving it. So I think this is an evergreen film. It will be just as relevant in 100 years. But what it does is you're in a one-to-one relationship with these survivors in this film. You're not in the 5th row or the 20th row in some auditorium, and they are talking to you, and you get to create a connection with them, and you start to understand how they think, and were they dangerous or were they not dangerous to society. So I think that this film tells their stories and will continue to be able to be used to allow them to tell their stories to hopefully millions of people. When you think about that, telling the stories is, people have told me already, who have seen this film, that this tells the story better than any survivor can tell the story, because the survivor is not that close to you normally. Number two, there's no images, there's no sound effects, there's no music. It isn't cut the way this is cut, because this goes very fast to appeal to the kind of audiences we have today. People don't have long attention spans, so how do you keep their attention? So this film creates a survivor experience better than anything that they could have even had before.
Absolutely. And you are part of this wonderful program that's happening. It's happening in our area, January 13th to the 27th. They will be live, and it will also be totally virtual and free as well to the community. It represents many countries. There's 148 films being selected and being viewed in our community, and 54 4 of those films were directed by women. Just wanted to make that as a note as well. So what's next? What's your next project? You're going to do one about your grandmother?
No, but there are articles on our website about my grandmother. There are articles about why do humans find other humans as threats. And I think there's a very interesting article there about lions and how the biggest threat to a lion or a pride of lions are other lions. They're always killing each other. But when we look at lions, they look identical to us. They don't look different, but they actually can tell the difference between one pride and another. And it has to do with the pattern of their whiskers. You know, they have gray whiskers, black, 2 whites, and that order. And they find this other group to be dangerous, and they go and kill it. So it's an animalistic instinct to find anything different in someone else and see them as a threat.
We have even comments here. This is wonderful. We can't wait to see the film. What's the website? The website for the Florida Film Fest, the Miami Jewish Film Festival, is miamijewishfilmfestival.org. And Paul, what is your website if people want to get in touch with you and learn more about the programs that you provide as well as the film itself?
Well, let me say first, on the Miami website, because there's so many films, you have to go all the way down to the Florida section, because all the survivors are from Florida. I'm based in Florida, so they put us in the Florida section to find the film. And then you can click on it and get a free ticket to see the film, including instructions of how to show it on your TV. Our other website our only website right now is www.ajourneyintotheholocaust.com. And I can give you the website later that will get you directly into Against All Odds, Surviving the Holocaust at Miami Film Festival. And you can post it in your comments.
If you want to do it now, go ahead.
I have to look it up.
We'll do it later.
It's
then.
lengthy. It's not
/
Yeah, you just click on it and you don't have to type it again.
Paul Bachow, thank you so much for this time together. You will live forever in your films, and thank you so much. And I can't wait to hear and see and feel your next project, whatever that may be. So thank you for taking the time and coming into the studio today.
Thank you for having us and to promoting this, because it is an important film for everyone in your audience to see.
Jews and non-Jews alike.
Absolutely.
And I want to thank you for joining the Community Voice. I'm Fara Sax. Until next time, be safe. Take care of yourselves.